How do you do? Mr. Brian Peters feels it would be a little unkind to present this podcast, gravely amusing, without just a word of friendly warning. We are about to unfold an episode from the mind of Brian Peters, a fan of pop culture who sought to create a podcast after his own image, without reckoning upon God. It is one of the strangest podcasts ever listened to. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such strain, now's your chance to, well, we warned you.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Halloween special of your favorite horror history podcast, Gravely Amusing. You know, the not so funny horror history podcast that puts VHS tapes in your kid's trick or treat bag. Yeah, that's us. And I'm your host, the man child of the macabre, Brian Peters, and you've dug up the podcast where a pop culture historian looks at the history of horror, sci fi, and the unexplained. This show focuses on the not so funny things from history and pop culture. Things that will thrill you, may shock you, might even horrify you. We're currently on season 2 of Greatly Amusing, and each season will focus mainly on horror history by the decade. And this season, we are focusing on the 1950s. And for Halloween, there is one story from the 1950s that really changed the way we looked at the world. One that changed not only the future of horror in books and cinema and pop culture in general, but changed the way we look at the world. This story is not make believe, is not like Dracula or Frankenstein or the Mummy, Wolfman, stuff like that. It's not like Godzilla or aliens in space, which could very be true. You know, I want to believe. This story I'm about to tell you is very true. I want you to think about the area that you live in. Maybe maybe you live in an apartment building where you see your neighbor sometimes in the hall. Maybe there's a quiet guy you see sometimes and you don't pay attention to them. You know, seems nice enough, always smiles, always polite, just keep to themselves. You know, it's post-COVID. Everybody's pretty much a dang introvert now. But you don't see any worries with this person. Or maybe you don't live in the city. Maybe it's a small town. Whatever type of area you live in, I want you to think about the people you know. Think about the people in your area that everybody knows. You know, maybe it's the mailman, maybe it's a local shop owner of the coffee shop, or maybe it's someone that owns a general store in town or like the corner gas station. You know, maybe it's your next door neighbor who's always mowing people's grass in the street, shoveling the sidewalks, you know, doing handyman jobs around town. It's just this nice person that keeps to themselves, smiles, very nice to you. You know, maybe they invite you over to dinner once, and maybe they cook barbecue. You know, maybe they served you a bowl of soup and a nice looking handmade bowl. Just nice neighbors doing nice things. Well, what if I told you that barbecue that you thought was so tasty, you know, where you had seconds, maybe thirds because you're a fat ass, and you had pulled pork and sausages, and it was just so delicious. Like they got you know the potato buns for the hot dogs. You know what I'm talking about. And Heinz ketchup, not Hunt's garbage, just like real Heinz ketchup and French's mustard. You know, maybe they had like the relish, the dill relish, you know what I'm saying? And maybe like a little bit of onions. Maybe they put a little chili on that dog. You know what I'm saying? A little chili on that dog. little cheese, little sprinkled cheese, and it was delicious. And we don't really know what's in a hot dog anyway, do we? You know, let's say this wasn't an all beef hot dog. Let's say that this was all human flesh, and maybe that pulled pork was human flesh, and maybe that hot dog was intestines. Oh, and that bowl of soup you ate, that bowl was indeed homemade. It was made out of a skull. Yeah, a human skull. You were eating out of a human skull the whole time. That was cleaned up and the brains were scooped out like your dang Indiana Jones in the Temple of Doom, but it's a human instead of a monkey. Well, all that really happened in the 1950s in Plainfield, Wisconsin. These things did happen, and it would shock that town and the world forever. This is the true story of the man that inspired the character Norman Bates in Psycho. This man inspired Leatherface and that whole family in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. This man inspired Buffalo Bill telling women to put the lotion on his skin or it gets the hose in Silence of the Lambs. This is the story of the Butcher of Plainfield, the grandfather of gore. This is the true story of Ed Gein. Ed Theodore Logan. Ed Theodore Gein was born in La Crosse, Wisconsin on August 27th, 1906. He would be the second of two boys to George Philip Gein, who was born in 1873. So that means that his daddy was, if I can do math here, not on top of the head. Of course, I'm using a calculator because I'm lazy. His dad would have been 33, and his mom was named Augusta Wilhelmine Gein. I think the maiden name was Lurke, whatever. And she was born in 1878. So she would have been about 28 years old, if I'm doing my math right. I'm not a math person, I'm a writer. And Ed had an older brother named Henry, sorry. And Augusta, the mama, was a very religious woman. And she preached to her sons about the innate immorality of the world, the evil of drinking, and the evil of women and girls, and the belief that all women were promiscuous and they were the devil. And I assume that Kathy Bates in Waterboy was probably inspired from her a little bit. Also, probably the mom in Carrie, Miss White. I think Stephen King probably took some inspiration from this mother. But she believed that basically everything was the devil. And she reserved time every afternoon to read to her sons from the Bible, usually selecting verses from the Old Testament where God was a bit crueler and struck people dead for everything. And she preached out of the book of Revelation, mainly concerning fire, damnation, death, murder, divine retribution, everything, basically all sin focused. No hope out of that. No real teachings of Jesus or anything hopeful, whatever. But she preached this frequently, and Ed would learn to idolize her, and he became obsessed with her. Everything that his mom said was gold. His mother was an angel sent from heaven to lead him on the way to the promised land. But to support her preaching, Augusta absolutely hated her husband, absolutely hated George. George, you see, was an alcoholic who was unable to keep a job. He would work various times as a carpenter, a tanner. I think he was an insurance salesman, but he didn't really have a steady job. He mostly would just drink all the time. And, if you were married to a bitch like that, you probably would drink too. Because for some reason he didn't leave her because he's stupid. But during this time in La Crosse, Gein's father actually eventually owned a grocery shop and they were doing pretty good. But he decided to sell the business and leave the town of La Crosse with his family to live in isolation on a 155-acre farm in the town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. This would become their main residence as well. So I'm willing to say that probably what happened is Augusta went to George and said, yeah, so there's just a bunch of sinners here in this city. And we need to get away from the sinners and the hell and the damnation. So she's probably told George to sell the business and we're going to go live in the middle of nowhere. So they did. And they took about the 2 hour journey from La Crosse, which actually was like, I guess, like actual kind of city for Wisconsin, whatever you want to call it. It wasn't no Milwaukee or or Green Bay or anything like that. Using geography, La Crosse is more on the west side of Wisconsin, and Plainfield is kind of in the somewhat north middle of the state, and it's kind of in the middle of nowhere there. And they moved to this farm in total isolation. They went from a city that housed probably about 40,000 people in the 1940s to a town that had maybe 300 people. And they moved to this when Ed was about 8 years old. So they take up residence here permanently and they take advantage of the farm's isolation. And Augusta decides that her boys will have no outsiders. Their boys will have no influence whatsoever from the outside. So you have little Henry and little George having no friends but each other and no social interaction with anybody. Now, Ed would leave the farm to attend school only, but outside of school, he would only do chores at the farm. And because of this lack of social skills and social integration, Ed was very shy. And his classmates and teachers would say that he had strange mannerisms. He would laugh randomly, like he was the Joker or Arthur Fleck. And it seemed like sometimes he was laughing at his own personal jokes, but anytime he was trying to make friends, Augusta would punish him. And according to anybody that knew the family, Ed had no friends. And despite this poor social development, thanks to Augusta, Ed actually did pretty okay in school, and he became a very avid reader, reading really anything he could. And because the lack of social interaction, Ed would focus more on his mother. This created more control of Augusta on Ed as she would control his social development and deepen his dependency on her, which would create a very disturbing foundation for his life because his mother would essentially be God to him. And even though she was preaching and giving these sermons and Bible study and everything, she would create severe psychological issues in Ed because all he knew was his mother. Slowly but surely, everything that Ed knew besides his mother would now start going away. On April 1st of 1940, Ed's father would die of heart failure at the age of 66. With the father gone, the breadwinner, Ed and his brother Henry began doing jobs around town to try to cover living expenses. The brothers were considered pretty reliable guys and honest by the rest of the community. They worked as handymen just like their father did. But what's very interesting is Ed would also work as a babysitter for neighbors. He enjoyed babysitting because he related more to children than adults. Because at this time, this 33-year-old man had the mind of a child. I mean, he grew up with no social interaction, he grew up with no development whatsoever, he grew up with no understanding of the real world and kind of how it works and how relationships work. He only knew what his mother taught him and a little bit from his father. So, babysitting children. So, around this time after George dies, Henry decides to kind of get a little bit more independence because he doesn't want to end up like his father. He doesn't want him and Ed to end up like dad. So Henry actually begins dating a divorced mother of two. Yes, I said divorced mother of two. So not only a divorced woman, but a mother of two children already. So that had to go absolutely wonderful with Augusta. And as he moved away, he worried about his brother's attachment to their mother. So he tried his best to detach Ed from Augusta and say things like, mom's crazy and there's so much more to life out there and you need to get away from her and experience life, man. You're in your 30s. Like, come on, dude. And Ed will respond with shock and absolute hurt and disgust towards his brother. And when your brother is saying some horrible things about basically your God, there might be something you have to do about it. So here starts the controversy of Ed Gein. On May 16th, 1944, so dad's been dead for about 4 years, Ed was burning away marsh vegetation on the property, and Henry was with him. And the fire got completely out of control, which draws the attention of the fire department. In the midst of this chaos and smoke, Henry goes missing, and him and Ed just get separated. Henry goes missing, and at the end of the day, the fire was extinguished. The firefighters were gone, and Ed tells the firefighters and police that, hey, my brother was with me. He's gone. So with lanterns and flashlights, they search for 43-year-old Henry, and they find him laying face down in on the ground and dead. And apparently he's been dead for some time. And it appeared that the cause of his death was heart failure, since he had not been burned or injured or anything. Police would say that his cause of death was asphyxiation from the smoke, led to heart failure, whatever. But scholars and other people in police would eventually reveal that this might have been more of a Cain and Abel story. You see, when Henry's body was found, he had some severe bruises on the back of his head, almost like he was bludgeoned to death. Did Ed kill him? Did he fall on his head on some type of tree thing? We'll never know. But with Henry deceased, Ed and his mommy were now completely and utterly alone and with each other, at least until her health started going. You see, shortly after Henry died, Augusta had a paralyzing stroke, and Ed devoted himself to taking care of her more than he already was. Ed would later recount some weird things about his mother. He said that after this first stroke, him and his mother visited a man, we'll just call him Smith, who lived nearby, and they wanted to purchase straw because, they're farmers and stuff. According to Ed, his mom witnessed the Smith guy beating a dog to death. A woman inside the Smith residence came outside and yelled for Smith to stop, but Smith beat the dog to death. His mom was not upset by the fact that the dog was being beat to death, but rather the presence of the woman. Augusta told Ed that the woman wasn't married to Smith and she had no business being there. She was basically a harlot and she needed to go back into the house, or actually not even be there. And that situation really stuck with Ed because shortly after that incident and dealing and seeing the sinner of the harlot and not the sin of killing this dog, Augusta had a second stroke and her health would deteriorate rapidly. And Augusta would die on December 29th, 1945, at the age of 67. So his dreams of being with his mom and being with her forever went away just less than a year after his brother died. Needless to say, that this was the moment that Ed Gein no longer existed. Whatever hope in Ed, whatever positivity, whatever light, whatever good psychosis that could have been saved was now gone. His God was dead. He lost his only friend and true love. He was now absolutely 100% alone in the world. He lost everybody. In just a span of 5 years, he lost his family. During this time, what people didn't know is that Ed started boarding up rooms in the home that was used by his mother, including the upstairs and downstairs parlor, the living room, basically any room that his mom would go to. He boarded up, and those rooms were left absolutely like spotless and pristine. Kind of like when a kid leaves for college and how the mom might keep the room just completely perfect, but he would make jobs, and he got like a payment from the government farm starting in 1951. He occasionally would work the road crew and crop threshing, and somewhere in like 1946 to 56, he would sell 80-acre parcel of land that Henry had owned. So like he did for money, and like no one thought anything. Like they're like he's just trying to make it. But something else was going on. On the morning of November 6th, 1957, a 58-year-old hardware store owner of Plainfield, Bernice Warden, disappeared. The hardware store's truck was seen driving out from the rear of the building at about 9:30 a.m. But the hardware store saw Faye because in Wisconsin at this time, it was deer hunting season. Now, I don't know where you live, listener, but I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. And in Western Pennsylvania, actually get Thanksgiving off, Black Friday, the weekend, and then Monday we would be off to I think the week leading up to Thanksgiving we were probably off too. But the Monday after the weekend of Thanksgiving, we would be off for deer hunting. I had a horrible experience deer hunting with my father, and that's a whole nother story. But basically, in the Ford town, like Wisconsin, it would shut down the whole town. It would be a ghost town. All the men would be go hunting, and all the women, I guess, would go hunting too, or they'd be at home. Um, they Nobody was in town, and no, other than seeing this car drive away at 9:30, nobody saw nothing. So about 5 o'clock, Bernice Ward, who was actually the deputy sheriff, Frank Warden, he entered the store of his mother's at around 5 p.m. and he was looking for his mom, and he found the cash register open and blood stains were on the floor. Frank told investigators after he called the police that he noticed the past couple of days Ed Gein had been over many times and was kind of bothering his mom. He even asked her on a date, and she, kind of turned him down nicely, but he kept bugging her. In the night previous, he inquired to her about coming in the morning and purchasing a gallon of antifreeze. And that morning, he went and did purchase that antifreeze. There was a last written receipt by Warden. The morning she disappeared, and that was that. So, knowing that Ed Gein was the last person to see his mom alive, him and the police searched for Gein. And some reports I've heard that Gein was actually at dinner at a neighbor's house. I've heard reports here that he was arrested at the grocery store, but can't find out which one happened, and I apologize. Yeah. But they arrested Gein, and the Washara County office started to search the Gein farm to try to find Bernice Warden. And they most certainly found her. I hope you don't have a weak stomach. This is what the sheriff's department found. The sheriff's deputy discovered Bernice Warden's body in the home of Ed Gein. I might add that in this home, had boarded up all those rooms that his mom stayed in, and the rest of the home was absolute filth. I mean, it made an episode like an OCD's paradise, just full of filth. It was like from the dumpster and brought it to the. And Ed slept in a small room that was beside the kitchen because that's all he needed was just to be able to go to the kitchen to cook himself a meal. And this house had no electricity. So these deputies are walking in this home with no electricity, only their flashlights and moonlight. And this is what they find with their flashlights. They find the decapitated body of Bernice Warden in a shed on the property, hung completely upside down by her legs, a crossbar at her ankles, and ropes at her wrists. The torso was basically dropped like an animal carcass or like a deer. And it seemed that shot with a 22 caliber rifle and cut this way after her death. So that means that Ed waited for her to sound somewhere in the conversation, buying antifreeze, and he shot her in the head and then dragged her body to the truck, her home, and did that to her. That's not all. The sheriffs found a little bit more in this house of gore. They found the following items. Found whole human bones and fragments. Found the whole home. And they've been put in a waste, right? Well, the waste basket was made of human skin. There was human skin in chairs, like a bedpost in the home were human skulls as bedposts. There were female skulls, tops sawed completely off. You know, Yadov ate from at Ed Gein's house. Well, it was made from a human skull. A corset made from a female torso, skinned from to waist. There were leggings made from human and masks made from the skin of female heads. Mary Hogan's face, who would be a suspect we'll mention in a second, Mary Hogan's face as a mask was found in a paper bag. Her skull was in a box. Bernice Warden's entire head, because they found her decapitated, it was in an it was in an entire her entire head was in a burlap sack. Bernice Warden's heart was in a plastic bag in front of Ed Gein's pot as he was probably or serve it in that wonderful chili that he would have cooked for some minorities. That's not all. No. They found 9 vulva in a shoebox. If you do not know what a vulva is, it's basically the visible structure of the female genitalia. Basically, the vagina itself. Yeah, don't go Google that, okay? Stay clean, but that's what it is. Were in a shoebox. A young girl's and the vulvas of 2 females, 10 years old. So he possibly killed something else, which we'll get to in a bit too. He had young girls' dresses and vulvas of female girls about 15 years old. But that's not all. He also had a belt that he made that wasn't utility belts from Batman. No, it was a belt made from female human nipples. They also found 4 noses, a pair of lips, a window shade drawstring. They found a lampshade made from the skin of a human face. Near that, they also books that he probably read. Well, he did read some pulp magazines, adventure stories, and stories that involved cannibalism or Nazi atrocities, specifically concerning Islamists who selected tattooed prisoners for death in order of fashioning lampshades and other items from their skin. So, lampshade made from skin of a human. And they, of course, fingernails from female fingers and a punch in a prayer tree. So pretty much in the Texas Chainsaw movie, that scene you see of the house with bones everywhere and a human lampshade for the dinner light, and that was taken from Ed Gein's crime scene. So what you saw in Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the things with Leatherface, the skin on the face, and in Silence of the Lambs with Buffalo Bill with the women's skin suit, trying to create a whole suit that he would wear to feel like his mom, feel closer to his mom. There are reports that he targeted women that looked a bit like his mother or reminded him of his mother. And that's kind of where he built the suit from. And Texas Chainsaw Massacre, that's what Ed's like. So if you thought that was fake, or as the movie made you think that it was based on a true story in Texas, it was based on various different true stories, and that was real. That's what Ed's house would have looked like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Very real. These things that were found in the home were photographed at the state lab, and then they were disposed of. When they finally questioned Gein in an interrogation room, this is what they found out. Gein told scares that between 1947 and 1952, he had made about 40 nocturnal visits to 3 local graveyards in town, and he dug up bodies and claimed that he was dazed-like state, didn't know what was going on. And about 30 of these 40 visits, he said he came out of this daze while in the cemetery, and he in good order, and he returned home empty-handed. So he's saying that 30 out of 40 visits didn't take anything. I call that Tyler says in that TikTok, bullshit. Uh, on the other occasions, though, he said that these 10 occasions out of the 40, he says he dug up the graves of the recently buried middle-aged women he thought resembled his mother, took the bodies home, and he tanned their skins to make his paraphernalia, if you will. Uh, Gein admitted to stealing from just 9 graves. He led investigators to these locations. State Crime Lab investigator Alan Wilmosky participated in opening 3 of these graves identified by Gein. And the caskets were inside wooden boxes, and the top boards ran crossways, not lengthwise. And the tops of these boxes were about like 2 feet below the surface in sandy soil. So this means that Gein had robbed the graves soon after the funeral. The graves were not completed. So they say, or Gein did say that search obituaries, and when somebody resembled his mom, he basically would go to the graveyard that night when the soil was fresh, and he would dig up this grave like he was Victor Frankenstein and make his paraphernalia. Now you're probably asking, like, why didn't he dig up his mom's grave and stuff like that? Well, you see, in that area that his mom was buried, she was actually buried under like concrete because the soil wasn't very stable. So he couldn't get to her grave. There were some graves he couldn't get to. But yeah. So some of these graves though, where they, exhumed the bodies that Gein told him, they were certain whether he could actually single-handedly dig up the grave during one night. But they did find the graves as Gein described. One of these caskets was empty. Another casket did have Gein's crowbar that he accidentally left. And the final casket saw most of the body missing. And Gein had returned rings and some body parts to the casket later. So things just didn't add up, but some did. Also, some of the deaths that Gein said that he or some of the bodies that Gein said he had, the numbers didn't really add up. So Gein goes further to reveal that soon after his mother's death, he began to create this woman suit so that he become his mother, to literally crawl into her skin. So like I said, now Gein denied having sex with the bodies and saying that he was not a necrophiliac. He said it smelled too bad, so he didn't go for that. But yet he cut out vulvas. Ugh, God, it makes me want to puke. Grandfather of Gore here, ladies and gentlemen. During state crime laboratory interrogation, Gein did admit to killing not only Bernice, but he admitted that he killed a 51-year-old Mary Hogan, who was a tavern owner who was missing since 1954. So he was missing for 3 years. The police did find her head in his house, but he stated that he did not remember that he killed her and didn't remember any details of her. As for 15-year-olds that were found in his a 16-year-old youth whose parents were friends of Gein and attended baseball games and movie with him, reported that Gein had kept shrunken heads in the house, which he described as relics sent by his cousin, who had served in the Philippines during World War II. So he he knew some teenagers, which probably where he got the female girls from. Upon further investigation of police, these were determined to be human facials and not shrunken heads, and they were carefully peeled and used as masks for, Leatherface inspiration. During even more questioning, Sheriff Art Skeely reportedly assaulted Gein by banging his head into the face and face into a brick wall. And because of all this confessions during this questioning, Gein's confession was ruled inadmissible. And this detective somehow died of heart failure at age 43 before Gein could have trial. So all the stuff that he confessed to doing, completely thrown out of court because of an attack, the sheriff. How about that? Many who knew that detective said that he was completely traumatized by the Gein's crimes, and had and along with the fear of having to testify, um, and the fact that Gein's confession would be inadmissible now because he attacked, that he kind of like died because of that. So crazy stuff. In addition to the murders of Hogan and Warden, Gein was also considered for other cases because these numbers weren't matching up. In November 1957, authorities confronted Gein once again with a list of missing person cases that occurred between the death of his mother and the death of Bernice Warren. The suspicions were further increased after the discovery of Megan's body. But a lie detector exonerated many other murders, and the sites concluded the violence was only directed to women who physically resembled his mother. So they're saying that he didn't kill any children, and he passed this lie detector. Um, I don't know. I'll let you be the judge there. But these are some other missing cases here. So Georgia Jean Weckler, who was 8 years old, disappeared from her far home in Fort Atkinson at about 8 p.m. on May 1st, 1947. She was given a lift home from grade school in Jefferson by a neighbor who dropped her off at the lane that led from Highland to the Weckler farm. And Weckler was last seen open the family mailbox and removed a stack of mail. And this little girl was seen again. Witnesses reported seeing a dark colored black 1936 Ford sedan with a gray plastic spotlight in the vicinity that afternoon. Gein, a black 1937 Ford sedan. So, yeah, that's pretty close. But he only killed women that were near his mother. He didn't kill kids. Yeah, sure. Evelyn Grace Hartley, 15, still matching up with these children's parts that were found in his home. Evelyn Greatly, she was 15, and she went missing when she was babysitting a 20-month-old girl at the home of a La Crosse State College professor, Professor Rummason, on the evening of October 24th, 1953, in La Crosse. So he drove 2 hours to the place of his birth. And the story goes that evening, her father, Richard, called the Rummason house times after she failed to check in as planned at 8:30 p.m. and no one answered the phone. So, as a concerned, he drove to the house and found the doors locked, the lights and radio on, and items were all over the house. The living room furniture had been moved places, and Evelyn's school books were moved as well. Richard found her shoes in different rooms, shoe was upstairs, one shoe was downstairs. He also found his daughter's glasses upstairs. Richland did not find his daughter, or Richard didn't find his daughter. And after the arrest, Gein was questioned regarding this disappearance, but he denied it, passed 2 lie detector tests, and no remains of this girl were found in his property. Who were these young girls? There's also a possibility that he killed a Victor Harold Travis, 42, a resident of Adams County, Wisconsin, who went off to deer in the company of someone they knew named Edmund Burgess on November 1st, 1952. In the late afternoon, they stopped for refreshments at Matt in Plainfield for a couple hours, and around 7 p.m., they left the bar. They went into Burgess' car and drove away, and the hunters, along with the car Burgess was driving, were never seen again, and no trace of them was ever found. Travis and Burgess had been hunting on the farm next to Gein's despite his objection on the day of their disappearance. In addition, Gein has been linked to the June 1954 disappearance of a neighbor, James Walsh, who was 32. Walsh and his wife lived near Gein, and Gein performed chores for her after her husband supposedly went missing. Gein was also investigated for potential involvement in the August 1956 disappearance of an Irene Keating, who was 30, who was seen in Plainfield, and the attempted abduction of Judy Rosenzal, 16, from Auroraville. So let's do the math here. So he possibly killed his brother. He killed Bernice Warden. He killed Mary. Gosh, I suck. Mary. Quite contrary. What was Mary's last name? Mary Hogan. So he killed Mary Hogan. And he possibly killed an 8-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 42-year-old, and his brother, the disappearance of a neighbor, and a disappearance of a 30-year-old, and another disappearance of a 16-year-old. So we're looking at 10 people that he possibly killed. Wow. Well, this November 21st, 1950, not long after he was arrested, arranged on one court a first-degree murder, not guilty by reason of his sin. In modern days, this would have forever to go through trial. It didn't happen this time. He was diagnosed, though, by the courts with schizophrenia and found fit for trial. So there you go. He was sent to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane, which is now the Dodge Correctional Institution, maximum security facility in Waupun, and it was later transferred to the Monona State Hospital in Madison, Wisconsin. In 1968, doctors determined that Gein was mentally able to confer with counsel and participate in his defense. So 11 years later, and he did have a trial. The trial began on November 10th, 1998, and it lasted a week. A psychiatrist testified that Gein had told him that he did not know whether the killing was intentional or accidental. Gein had told him that he examined a gun in Warden's store and the weapon discharged and that killed Warden, which is a load of bull. He said he not aimed the rifle at Warden, and he just didn't remember anything else that happened. Now, at the request of the defense, this trial was held without a jury. With Judge H. Gomer presiding, Gein was found guilty by Gomer on November 14th. Second trial dealt with Gein's sanity. After testimony by doctors for the prosecution defense, Gomer ruled Gein not guilty by reason of insanity and had him committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane. Gein would spend the rest of his life in a mental hospital. Judge Gomer wrote, due to prohibitive costs, Gein was tried for only one murder as a Mrs. Warden, but he admitted to killing Mary. Wow. Now you're probably wondering, so after all this, what happened to his house? What happened to the Gein property and all the horrible, disgusting things that went on with it? Well, you see, this is what started the very disgusting thing of gore whores, as I call them, and people wanting to collect memorabilia from tragic, horrible, disgusting things and things of serial killers. Well, I'm intrigued in the series, of course. I am intrigued by the mental state of it, but I would not go and try to collect serial killer memorabilia out of respect for the victims. But this particular case attracted a lot of people just wanting a piece of that pie. And Gein's house, the outbuildings, and the whole 195-acre property were actually appraised at $4,700, which just for inflation is about $50,000. 50, yeah, 50, yeah, $50,000. Yeah. His possessions his possessions were scheduled to be auctioned on March 30th, 1958, and amidst rumors that the house and land it stood on might become a tourist attraction. Early on the morning, I'm so sorry, everything was scheduled to on March 30th, but ironically, um, however you don't think, on the morning of March 20th, the house was destroyed by a fire. A deputy fire marshal reported that a garbage fire had been set about 6 feet from the house by a cleaning crew who was given the task of disposing refuse, and hot coals were recovered from the spot of the bonfire, but that fire did not spread along the ground from that location to the house. Uh, but the cause of the fire was never determined. It's possible that the fire was not considered a matter of urgency to the fire chief, Frank Warden, who was the son of Gein's victim, Bernice Warden. Yeah, might not be a concern for him. When Gein learned the incident while in detention, he shrugged and he said, just as well. Gein's Ford sedan, which is used to haul the bodies of the victim, that actually was sold at public auction for just $60, which is the equivalent to about $8 in 2023. And it was sold to a carnival show off, Bunny Gibbons. And Gibbons charged carnival goers 25 cents just to see it. Gore horse. What are you going to do? Gein died at the Monona Mental Hospital due to respiratory failure, secondary to lung cancer, on 26, 1984, at the age of 77. Huh. So just a few days before my wife was born. Interesting. I don't I don't know why I said that. Over the years, souvenir seekers actually would chip away, and the whole stone itself was actually stolen in 2000. It was found in 2001 near Seattle, Washington, and was placed in storage in the sheriff's department. Now, the gravestone is there unmarked, but placed near his mother's grave. He wanted to be in the first place. There you go. Gein is the grandfather of gore. Before this, there were really only two cases that struck media, that struck the world as like this: Jack the Ripper and H.H. Holmes, the first serial killer in America, you could say. Gein's story has had a lasting effect on pop culture. Completely. when this story came, these gore whores, if you will, um, one particular guy named Richard Block, who was an author, he went up to Plainfield, Wisconsin, and he was a writer of fiction, logical horror, fantasy. He took this case of Ed Gein and to base his book, published in 1959, something you might have heard of. Was a protege of H.P. Lovecraft. He friend of Hitchcock, and Hitchcock took this story and created the movie Psycho based on this. And we will talk about Psycho next season, big part of next season. And if you've never seen Psycho, Psycho is a story of a man named Norman Bates who had a very, very sick obsession with his mother. Ed Gein's legacy not only inspires the book Psycho and the movie, but it would loosely be adapted into numerous films. 1974's Deranged, 2000's In the Light of the Moon, the Ed Gein the Butcher in 2007, even had a musical in 2010, and inspired Rob Zombie, of course, in A House of 1,000 Corpses, and a sequel, The Devil's Rejects. Gein has served as inspiration for so many serial killers. Norman Bates, as I mentioned, Leatherman, Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs, even Carlin Green in Con Air, and also the character Dr. Oliver Thredson in a TV series, American Horror History Asylum. The legacy of Ed Gein is something that should not really be passed down. It's not something that she remembered, but because the human mind tends to lead to fascination of evil, it tends to lead to fascination of discussing things. Kind of why horror keeps going, I guess. People like to be, and stories like this just tied in things and made things more terrible. Like I asked you in the podcast, imagine that neighbor in your neighborhood is a psycho killer, is robbing graves in the middle of the night, is killing women and children and small girls in the neighborhood. And you just thought that they were a nice man that mowed your grass. This type of things is what made things horrifying to be closer to home. Me, I prefer to just like things like Myers or Frankenstein and Dracula, Wolfman, things that probably could never really be true. But this was very, very true. And this is a legacy that Ed Gein forever as the grandfather of gore. If you like this podcast and you want to know more horror history, hit the follow button on your ear and search for us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, X, and hit like and subscribe lit in the graveyard. I hope this podcast thrilled you. I hope it shocked you. And if nothing else, I hope it left you gravely amused. Happy Halloween.